So first we'll talk about, I thought we were going to talk about historical figures first. Right, okay. So first we'll just go over some general things about sexology first. But before we do that, just have a little prelude here. I don't want to just like blast into the course without leaving some room to talk about, our reactions to these sort of things. But just so we are both on the same page, as you would imagine, throughout the book and in some of the slides, we'll have explicit sexual material, and I only use it to illustrate a point, and I'm not going to like shove anything in anyone's faces or anything like that. Yeah, but it's good to realize like this is a different class. By and far, most classes, even in psychology, don't have sexual content. But as you would imagine, in order to teach and learn about psychology of sexuality, there's going to be physical representations of things in order to talk about that. So, if you have a strong reaction to seeing these sort of things, then give yourself a break and know that it's okay. And for a lot of you, it'll be no big deal. So disregard what I'm saying right now, if that's you. So just a little bit of like what is the overarching goal of the science of sexology for human sexuality. As most science, one of the biggest reasons that people study this sort of stuff is just to understand more thoroughly different sexual behavior. So a lot of kind of what we've talked about before, that in the past, especially in Western society, sexual behavior and whatnot often was not studied at all, or talked about and things like that, other than maybe theologians who put a lot of rules on sexual behavior. So bringing in science into this around, early 1900s, or especially around 1950, 1960s, just the mere act of being like, okay, we have sexual behavior, let's actually look at it and then record things. It was very controversial, as we'll see today, just doing that. And so there's a lot of information that we haven't known as a society because we haven't studied it that thoroughly before necessarily. So we want to understand, normal, healthy sexual behavior and or, more aberrant behavior that may be healthy as well. And the more we study it, the more we know about it in general. And just like regular science, we want to understand and predict. If we really understand sexual behavior, then we should be able to predict it as well. And a lot of the science of sexology studies, what is healthy and what is unhealthy. So, pedophilia, clearly unhealthy, but we still want to study it and understand it in that way, and the effects that child abuse have on people and things like that. And then also, what do healthy relationships, sexual relationships, look like as well. And science often approaches sexuality from that viewpoint of what's healthy, what's unhealthy. So my research that I'm doing for my dissertation is all about what is healthy and unhealthy for adolescents. So compulsive sexual behavior is inherently unhealthy. It gets in the way of people's lives and whatnot, and responsibilities and things like that, compared to, what's healthy sexuality in adolescence. So these are the sort of things that science really concerns itself with as far as sexology. Control and influence in sexual behavior, ethical considerations when controlling behavior. So obviously some sexual behaviors we want to control, like coercive sex for the main example. So coercing someone into sex without their consent. So we want to also understand that. There's a lot of research on sexual coercion and things like that, with the ultimate goal of being able to impact society well, and hopefully, eradicate, if we can, any of that sort of behavior. A little bit more science, just overarching points. So we want to answer empirical questions. Empirical meaning it's got to be through the empirical scientific method that we can observe an actual thing. So like we've talked some about Masters and Johnson. They observed people having sex and then recording things down, doing that, and that's a very straightforward empirical sort of thing. What is actually physically happening, but also trying to tap into, psychologically what is happening as well. So remember, we talked about in one of the other previous lectures that I think it might have been in the Victoria era, that masturbation, that people said to society that masturbation causes blindness. And so you can empirically study whether this is true, have people masturbate a lot, and then see whether they become blind or not. Of course they don't, but that's just an example of a way that we can use science to understand sexuality. So objectivity, it's obviously debated about whether anyone can be truly objective about anything, but comparing a lot of what we learned about from our first lectures as far as religion goes, they would say, a lot of people, religious leaders would say masturbation is wrong, therefore it's unhealthy, therefore don't do it. And then as far as science goes, we'll say, we're going to step back from maybe what society says about all these things and assess for ourselves. And it's like, well, science really is more so concerned with, what is healthy sexuality, whereas religion's much more interested in, they may not say healthy, but they would say maybe good sexuality. So we're more, as scientists, more interested in what's healthy. And so this is more objective, being able to look with fresh eyes at this sort of thing and say, let's say, is masturbation healthy or not? It's been debated quite thoroughly in our society for a long time, Western society, and so science is able to come in and study these sort of things, you could say, objectively. We want things, as far as strict science goes, to be able to be falsifiable. So that means, keep on coming back to the masturbation and blindness example. It's like, well, your hypothesis is that masturbation does not cause blindness. And so that's falsifiable in that if we actually do find that everyone becomes blind because of their masturbation, it's falsifiable. So this is a sort of scientific claim, but not all interests of science lend itself to being everything that's true science is able to be falsified. They're hypotheses. And skepticism kind of goes in with both of those, objectivity and falsifiability together, just being like, well, I know what a lot of people believe about X, Y, and Z, but I would like to put it to the test. So let's talk a little bit about the history of particular figures like Freud and Margaret Mead and a few other people like that who were kind of on the beginning end of this scientific exploration of sexuality. So we'll talk about Charles Darwin first. So as far as understanding the psychology of sexuality, we'll talk a lot about evolutionary psychology, and you even have I think your last critical thinking paper is on evolutionary psychology, of just this notion that within all of us, this isn't necessarily true for everyone, but the theory goes that within all of us, we desire to procreate. And so the way to achieve that and satiate that desire is to have sex. And so we develop all of these sort of ways to attract mates so that we can have sex, so that we can have babies and propagate our species. And so natural selection becomes important in this, in that the people who procreate are typically the people who procreate most easily, often are more attractive, attract the opposite sex, and have sex with them to have babies. But as you probably have already surmised, a very scathing critical point to put into context as far as Darwinism and what we were just talking about is that really it only explains a man and a woman who want to have sex to have babies, and doesn't explain anything other than that. As opposed to people who don't want to have babies or don't want to engage in procreative sex and things like that. So it has like far-reaching claims, and it does seem to explain a lot about attraction for some people. So I think there's value in evolutionary psychology. But it's definitely it needs more work on being able to explain anything other than the most common sexual narrative of boy meets girl. They have sex and babies and stuff like that. So Richard von Krafft-Ebing was one of the first people to write a book about what he thought unhealthy sexuality was. And so he talked about, and I'm not exactly sure when this particular book was written, we could look that up, but wrote about how sadism and masochism when it comes to sex is unhealthy. So that wanting to inflict pain onto one's sexual partner in order to receive sexual pleasure, sadism saying that that's unhealthy, and masochism wanting to receive pain in order to experience pleasure, that is also unhealthy as well. He explains in this book. We'll touch more on this later in the atypical sexual behavior chapter about whether this is actually still stands true or not now. And he also considered homosexuality as a mental illness, and this might have been one of the this guy might have been one of the main reasons that the DSM had homosexuality as a mental illness in its diagnostic criteria and whatnot. So this seems to be an important guy as far as attempting to articulate what healthy and unhealthy sexuality is, but definitely seem to miss the mark as far as where we're going in society now. Magnus Hirschfeld was a German physician. A lot of these sexologists were physicians, not necessarily psychologists or maybe sociologists like we have today. People who are more interested in the psychology of sexuality will have studied psychology and whatnot, but back, in the early 1900s and whatnot, often it was physicians who were interested in sexuality. This guy was one of the first to use surveys to study sexual behavior. We'll get to, advantages and disadvantages of survey research and sexuality later today, but he was the first to say, why don't we just write down these questions that we want to know from people about their sexual lives. Hey, maybe they'll be, more honest about what they do and whatnot, and it can be anonymous and don't have to have any interaction and things like that. So definitely a bright idea that we continue to use today. This was, a really good guy compared to a lot of other people we've been talking about, but started to really try to establish rights for gay people in Germany. So that's very good. And established a scientific humanitarian committee. You can look that up and see what that's all about. And modern historian considered that this guy was one of the first formal advocates for homosexual rights and transgender rights as well. However, unfortunately, so you kind of see this pattern yet again, even in our history of sexologists, we would have, like we talked about before, times where things become more, society becomes less restrictive on sexuality, and basically, but then things in our society make things more restrictive yet again, so you kind of have these ebbs and flows of restrictive and non-restrictive. But the Nazis raided the institute that he established, the Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin, in large part because of his saying that homosexuality is normal, okay, and healthy. This was a big reason that the Nazis destroyed all of his work. And Henry Ellis, we talked a little bit about him before, but we'll talk a little bit more about him now. Again, English physician, see a lot of physicians here, and another social reformer. So this is a pretty good guy. He really wanted to make clear that sex for pleasure is healthy, and also and it's not just for procreation. So masturbation is healthy, and same-sex behavior is healthy. And any other these sort of social taboos, he's like, no, these things are healthy. And I showed you these books before. He wrote several volumes about this stuff in The Psychology of Sex, his books. And these books have a lot to do with, that I just showed you, different case studies of people who might be engaging in these sort of acts like masturbation, and it follows them and sees, like, is this actually healthy or unhealthy for them, which he concluded that it is. One tidbit about this guy is that he did support eugenics, so it's not like he's really all that great eugenics being, trying to make our society better by making sure that people who are inferior not procreate, and then people who are superior to procreate. And we've concluded that this is obviously very harmful, because who decides who is superior and who is inferior? So not a outstanding guy, but he did do other few things that were pretty cool. All right, Margaret Mead, probably, I think, maybe the only woman that we're going to talk about today. But she was very prolific and very intelligent. American cultural anthropologist, so she wanted to study, and she did study, went to very remote type places to study human sexuality. So she was one person who finally, just get out of America, get out of Europe, and see, a sexuality different in other cultures and whatnot. So we owe a lot to her as far as being able to make conclusions about, what is human sexuality in general, rather than what is the sexuality of Western Europeans, mostly white people, same as in America. She wrote Sex and Temperament in Three Primitive Societies, and this was a very important book because it showed the society in the Chambéry Lake region, I think it's around off of Australia, showed that the women in that society were actually dominant, and men were more of the supportive sort of role. So this kind of really questioned what many people thought for so long, especially men, that men were the leaders of society and were strong in that way and whatnot. And she's like, well, actually it doesn't have to be like that because of this particular set of people I found. So it kind of pokes holes in the whole narrative that men need to lead our society. And then Coming of Age in Samoa was a very popular study that she conducted. So Samoans, I think this is also another island off of Australia. She wanted to see whether what it's like to be an adolescent in that society as far as sexual development goes, and really she concluded that in Samoa that the people really aren't, the boys aren't really treated with full respect until they turn 16 and reach sexual maturity. And she found that kind of different from the adolescents in our society, in the U.S. society, that had more say-so even before they're 16. And she also found there that marriage is a social and economic arrangement, much like how marriage had been throughout Western society for a long time. I think it's pretty cool. She has her master's and PhD from Columbia. That's pretty awesome. I highly encourage all of you to look her up and see what books we have in the library written by her, and just read online things that she's written. Very interesting figure. All right, Sigmund Freud. Y'all have probably been waiting for this a little bit since the beginning of the semester, or even before. I would say that where I went to undergrad, Samford, was very based in the science of understanding psychology. So we really didn't talk about Freud that much at all, because a lot of his theories are not necessarily scientific, and you can't really put them to a test, and they're not falsifiable. So a lot of times people would just kind of sweep Freud under the rug, do a sort of general overview, brief overview of it. So you really have to kind of read on your own about Freud to understand him a little bit better, but we'll talk about him some now. So how we understand the word libido and use it today is different. It really just is, sexual desire, sexual appetite, that sort of thing is how we use it now. But he used it more broadly as kind of this wanting to join with and wanting to have this object outside of oneself. And it was like he considered this one of the main motivations for all humans. It kind of looks like, sexual desire, wanting another person to have sex with them and create and whatnot. But he had it broader, that it's not just attraction to others and whatnot, but wanting many other things, like chocolate, for instance. And so the libido is part of the id. You've probably, those of you who have taken Psychology 101 or 1010, I'm sure y'all have talked a little bit about the id, ego, and superego for Freud. As far as the libido is concerned, it is considered part of the id. So the id is a part of each person that wants something for themselves, is often very, self-centered sort of thing, and to some degree, to be a healthy human being, your id has to be satisfied, at least in a balanced sort of way. One of the cool things about Freud is that that he did contribute, I feel like, to psychology, was just saying, how important sexuality is to people. He might have overemphasized that everything has to do with sex necessarily, but he at least was someone who wrote a lot about how important sex was, and how important sexuality in general is, even for children. Yeah, he obviously has a lot of good books. This is another person that you can just search for Freud online and read some of his texts, articles that he's written, and things like that. Yeah. I went to one of his houses in Vienna several years ago, and it was really cool. I saw one of the couches that he put his patients on and talked to them, and there was a lot of letters there. They were in like shadow boxes. It's kind of a small museum now, but it has a lot of stuff from Freud. I thought that was pretty cool. Alright, so I want you guys to watch these couple videos. The first one just started at minute 250. You don't really need to pay attention to what's before that, and watch that one to the end, and then watch this whole one down here. And all of this is about Freud's theories. So couple what I just gave you about Freud and sexuality and motivation and libido, and then watch these videos to bolster your understanding of that. And so he made a big to-do about figuring out. He kind of went from, okay, here are all these people who we consider have mental disorders, like a lot of anxiety or depression and things like that. And he always brought it back to these stages. He would say, you know, any sort of neurosis that adults may have can be brought back to these stages. So a normal, healthy person will go through these stages. They have an oral stage where they're, like we said, the id really wants to satisfy that urge to suckle and things like that at the beginning. Anal, getting pleasure from that sort of thing in that period. And if there's ever any sort of interruption in the child being able to fully take pleasure in these sort of things, then they may be unhealthy later. As you may be able to tell, it's really difficult to measure and study this sort of stuff. Not many people really put too much stock into the psychosexual stages of development, but it's an interesting theory nonetheless.